everybody. All right, so let's get going with this week in NFL history. I didn't go back too far this time. I went back to October 15th. But a lot of these are really there were not a lot of modern statistics, interesting enough. All of these were from the 1890s and 1920s. So, hey, pretty cool. All right, here you go. So, October 15th, 1884, in New York City, a football rules convention was held, one that focused on the fair catch rule. The media defined the fair catch as, remember, this is 1884. We know things change over time. But at this time, a fair catch made direct from a kick or throw forward or a knock on by one of the opposing sides or from a punt. That it was considered a fair catch in 1884. Again, it was defined as a catch made directly from a kick, a throw forward, a knock on by one of the opposing sides, or from a punt. So, obviously, some things have changed a little bit in our era of football. We're only familiar with the fair catch being used on a kick or a punt, but this is 1884, and there were other options at that time. But this is kind of the birthplace of that. October 15th, 1933. Another New York, but this was when the Philly Eagles played in their first NFL regular season game as they faced the New York Football Giants. And what happened was bad. But the Eagles were formed, if you didn't know, was from the remnants of a defunct Frankfurt Yellow Jackets franchise. Because remember, there were a lot of teams that came and went in the 1920s and 1930s that either became new teams or got bought out. And so that's how Philly was formed. And so anyway, they played the New York Giants. The Giants already, again, jumped to an early lead in the first quarter, 21-0. That's when they led in the first quarter in this game. And because they were beating them so bad, they decided to sit their starters and put in their replacements. Well, guess what? That didn't help any. They ended up with their replacement players beating Philly 56-0. So I'm sorry that was your inaugural game, Philadelphia Eagles. All right, moving on. October 15th, 1987. Here's something from the 80s. This is when the NFL Players Association actually ended the 24-day strike. So it officially ended October 15th, 1987. As many of you know, there was movies made about this, right? There was an infamous NFL Players Association strike. And on October 15th, 1987, that's when the 24-day strike ended, because a lot of the star players were actually crossing the picket line. They just wanted to go back and play. Their teams were tanking, and those records counted. So even though there were scabs playing in the field, every time they lost, it still counted in their record. And so a lot of these star players back in the day were like, forget it, and started crossing. And so it didn't make sense for the strike to continue. Okay, so that's what happened on October 15th across all these different decades. Now let's move over to October 16th. There was only one thing I found, and this is when the Rock Island Independents traveled to Chicago to play our team, which was known at the time as the Chicago Cardinals. This is a stat that I thought was interesting. The Rock Island team manager, Walter Flanagan, sent a person to the huddle during that game onto the field and told the halfback for his team called Jim Kunzelman that he was now the new head coach and he wouldn't get more money for it. So you imagine being the halfback, Jim Kunzelman, for the Rock Island Independents. And someone sends you a message and says, hey, by the way, you're now the head coach and you're not getting more money for it. Anywho, so he became the youngest coach in the league when he took over as head coach at that time. And it's the only time right now in NFL history where there was a coaching change mid-game. So I thought that was fun. So even though it was one factoid I found, I thought that was interesting. Because I couldn't even imagine that happening today, right? Just in the middle of the game. That is just I couldn't even imagine someone running out there and be like, "Hey, you're the new coach." The other one's gone. Anywho. All right, so finally on to today, October 17th. All right, October 17th, 1883, another rules convention. This one discussed point totals. Again, this is in the 1880s, so you got the points were different. So they got together to decide on what actually equaled points. So scoring plays, including making a safety, at that point was only 1 point, not 2 points like today. So if you scored a safety, it was 1 point. A touchdown at that point, at that time, was 2 points only. Okay, so if you got a touchdown, it was only 2 points. If you got a safety, it was only 1 point. So if you got a goal following a touchdown, okay, that equals 4 points. Then a goal from the field was 5 points. And also, this is when the actual establishment of a referee was made. They realized that someone needed to be out there monitoring these games. So again, that's when they started actually deciding on the fundamentals of football, right? So that's why rules were happening, or rules conventions, so that people can all kind of agree and start creating football to be more uniform. Okay, so October 17th, 1891, James Naismith. People might know this guy as the man that invented basketball. Well, that's what he's known in modern times, you know. He is considered the first person to wear a head covering during a football game. And the reason he did that is because he was playing football as a center for Springfield College, and he got cauliflower ear, right? If people are familiar with football and rugby, like that happens, they're called cauliflower ears because, you know, it gets tugged on and it's really super violent. And so when he went back to play again, he was wearing a head covering. And so on October 17, 1891, James Naismith, also the first guy to kind of basically wear a helmet in football. And the last little factoid, October 17, 1920. I promise I'm not picking these out just because the Chicago stuff. It just happens that a lot of these teams, as you know, if you've been following NFL, they've been around since the inception. So you tend to find a lot of this, like, information from like decades and decades ago of the same teams. All right. So the Chicago, at that time, they were the Decatur Staleys, played their first NFL game against the Rock Island Independents. So again, here's that name again. But the important thing is that in this game were the famous Bears, legendary Bears, Patty Driscoll, and of course, George Halas. And we won that game 7-0. We talk about low scoring games today, but that was actually pretty common. Like 7-0, 3-3, 3-0, because it wasn't really about passing, you know, in the beginning of football. So anyway, that's your This Week in NFL History.
Thank you very much, Delilah. Appreciate this segment. As I said, always a fan favorite every week. This week in NFL history, I did not know Naismith was at least a two-smith. Lord have mercy, a two-sport athlete. Very familiar with him and the peach baskets in the gym because it was cold out. But I did not know that he played. Well, I mean, you laugh, but that was how basketball. They wanted the sport to play in the winter when it was too cold to be out playing baseball and doing other things like that. So that's how basketball came about. But this is not This Week in NBA history. This is This Week in NFL history. Thank you very much, Delilah.